The crystal glass felt cold and fragile in Liam's hand, a stark contrast to the stifling heat of the room. It was Arthur's dining room, a space that had once echoed with laughter and warmth, but now felt like a courtroom where Liam was permanently on trial. Across the polished mahogany table, Marcus Thorne held his own glass aloft, a theatrical gesture of magnanimity. He was all polished surfaces, the gleaming watch on his wrist, the brilliant shine of his shoes, the practiced, blinding smile that never quite reached his eyes. "To family," Marcus declared, his voice smooth and resonant, designed to fill spaces and command attention. "And to health. We are so blessed, so incredibly fortunate to be in a position to ensure Arthur gets the absolute best care in the world. Nothing is too much for family." Clara, Liam's ex-wife, beamed at Marcus, her hand resting possessively on his forearm. She looked radiant, dipped in the glow of Marcus's wealth. Her gaze flickered toward Liam for a fraction of a second, a little dart of pity mixed with smug justification. It was a look he had come to know well over the past year, the look that said, "See, this is what I chose. This is security. This is what you could never give me." Liam met her gaze without expression, his face a calm, placid mask he had perfected. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, as if agreeing with the toast. Inside, a familiar, slow-burning fire churned. He could feel the weight of the thin, leather-bound journal in the inside pocket of his jacket. It was unremarkable to look at, just a simple portfolio for sketches and notes, but it was the repository of his true life, the one they couldn't see. It held the intricate, breathtaking designs for the North Bridge Tower, a project that was silently reshaping the city's skyline. It held the contracts, the figures, the proof of a success so vast it would make Marcus's inherited fortune feel like pocket change. And in a small, zippered compartment within it were the receipts. A neat, chronological stack of documents from the Ashton Clinic, each one stamped, "Paid in full." Payments made not by the man giving the toast, but by the man being pitied at the end of the table. Arthur, seated at the head of the table, looked frail. His illness had carved new lines into his kind face, but his eyes were still sharp, still full of the intelligence and decency Liam had always admired. He smiled weakly at Marcus. "Thank you, Marcus. Clara, I don't know what I'd do without you both." The dramatic irony was so thick, Liam felt he could taste it. It was bitter, like unsweetened chocolate. Marcus and Clara had built their new life together on a foundation of lies, and the cornerstone of that foundation was their supposed generosity toward her father. They accepted his gratitude, absorbed it like sunlight, while Liam, the silent benefactor, sat in the shadows they cast. They thought his silence was weakness, his calm demeanor a sign of defeat. They didn't know that patience was a weapon, and that he was simply waiting for the right moment to pull the pin on the quiet grenade he held in his hands. Within 3 short weeks, this entire, glittering facade would not just crack, it would shatter into a million irreparable pieces. We love a story about patience and hidden strength, don't we? It's a powerful reminder that the loudest person in the room is often the weakest. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below, and if you're ready for the truth to come out, make sure you've liked this video and subscribed to the channel. You won't want to miss what happens when a good man's patience finally runs out. The conversation at the table moved on, a river of trivialities and boasts. Marcus recounted a recent trip to Monaco, describing the yachts in the harbor with the casual air of a man critiquing wallpaper. Clara added details, her voice animated, painting a picture of a life Liam had been deemed unfit to provide. He didn't listen to the words so much as the music. It was a symphony of arrogance, each note intended to highlight his own perceived inadequacy. He took a slow sip of water, the cool liquid a small comfort. He felt a profound sense of detachment, as if watching a play he had seen too many times. He knew all the lines. He knew the tragic flaw of the antagonists on the stage. Their fatal flaw was blindness. They looked at him and saw a quiet, slightly downtrodden architect, struggling to stay afloat after a painful divorce. They saw a man in a well-worn but respectable jacket, not the bespoke suit he could have afforded. They saw his 10-year-old sedan, not the collection of classic cars he kept in a private, climate-controlled garage. They saw what they wanted to see, what they needed to see, to validate their own choices. Liam's mind drifted from the oppressive dining room to the clean, open space of his studio. Light flooding in through floor-to-ceiling windows, the scent of drafting paper and fresh coffee, the quiet hum of powerful computers rendering his visions into tangible reality. That was his world. A world of creation, of precision, of building things that were both beautiful and strong, things that had integrity, unlike the relationship being flaunted in front of him, which was built on a lie so profound it was almost impressive in its audacity. He had let the lie stand for one reason, and one reason only: Arthur. He had not wanted to cause the sick man any more distress. Arthur loved his daughter, and the knowledge that she and her new partner were so callously deceiving him would be a cruel blow. So Liam paid the bills, month after month, and endured the dinners, visit after visit. He absorbed the humiliation like a shock absorber, protecting the fragile structure of Arthur's peace of mind. But every structure has a breaking point. Every material has a load limit. And Liam knew, with a certainty that was as solid as the foundations he designed, that the breaking point was coming. He could feel the stress fractures beginning to form in the edifice of their deceit. Soon, all it would take was one final, unbearable weight, and Marcus, in his magnificent ignorance, was about to provide it. The evening ended, as it always did, with a performance of affection. Clara hugged her father carefully, a staged embrace for an unseen audience. Marcus clapped Arthur on the shoulder, a gesture of masculine solidarity that was utterly hollow. "We'll see you Tuesday for your appointment, Art," Marcus said, using the familiar nickname with an ease that grated on Liam's nerves. "The car will be here at 9 sharp." They were taking him to the appointment that Liam was paying for, in a car they leased, to a clinic where they were known only as the patient's daughter and her partner, while the accounts department knew a different name entirely. Liam stood and offered a simple, quiet goodbye to Arthur. He squeezed the older man's thin shoulder gently. "Take care of yourself, Arthur." Arthur's eyes met his, and for a moment there was a flicker of something else, a deep, unspoken understanding. Or perhaps it was just Liam's wishful thinking. "You too, son. You too." The word son hung in the air, a ghost of a relationship that had been officially severed, but emotionally had never died. Clara's face tightened for a second before her perfect smile snapped back into place. She took Marcus's arm, and they swept out of the house, a king and queen leaving their subject behind. Liam remained for a moment in the quiet hall, the silence a relief. He listened to the sound of their expensive car roaring to life and speeding away, leaving only the scent of exhaust and arrogance in its wake. He took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. The play was nearing its final act. The memory of the breakup was a scar, faded but still tender to the touch. It hadn't been a dramatic, explosive fight. It had been something far more corrosive, a slow, quiet erosion of affection, replaced by a gnawing dissatisfaction on Clara's part. He remembered the day she had finally put it into words. They were in the living room of the house they had shared for 8 years, a house Liam had designed himself. It was a space filled with light and clean lines, a testament to his belief that a home should be a place of peace and clarity. But for months, it had been anything but. "I can't do this anymore, Liam," she had said, her voice devoid of the warmth he had once loved. She was standing by the large window overlooking the garden, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. She didn't turn to look at him. "Can't do what, Clara?" he had asked, though he already knew. He'd felt it coming for months, in her sighs of frustration while browsing luxury travel magazines, in her wistful comments about friends' new cars and country club memberships, in the way she looked at him, as if he were a project she had started with enthusiasm, but now found tedious. This, she said, a vague gesture encompassing the room, the house, their life. It's nice. It's comfortable. But it's not enough. Not enough? The words were a punch to the gut. He had poured his soul into building a life with her. He worked hard. His architectural firm was respected, if not flashy. They were more than comfortable. They were what he had considered prosperous. I need more, she clarified, finally turning to face him. Her eyes were hard. I need security, real security. I don't want to worry about whether your firm will win the next big contract. I don't want to hope for a good year. I want to know. It was then that he understood. Her definition of security wasn't about love or partnership or emotional support. It was a number in a bank account. A number he had, but had never felt the need to flaunt. He lived modestly by choice, finding more value in his work and his relationships than in ostentatious displays of wealth. He'd always assumed she shared those values. He had been wrong. So this is about money, he said, the statement flat, a sad realization dawning. It's not just about money, she'd snap back, a flash of defensiveness in her eyes. It's about a lifestyle. It's about not having to compromise. Marcus understands that. Marcus. The name landed between them, a heavy, polished stone. Marcus Thorne, heir to the Thorne Industries fortune. Liam had met him a few times at social functions. He remembered a man who spoke too loudly, who wore his wealth like a suit of armor, and who had looked at Clara with a predatory gleam in his eye. Liam had dismissed him as a peacock. He had fatally underestimated Clara's attraction to bright, shiny things. The divorce had been swift and surprisingly sterile. Clara wanted out, and she wanted her share, which Liam gave her without a fight. He had no interest in a bitter, protracted battle. His heart was broken, but his dignity was intact. The only complication was Arthur. During the final, awkward days of their marriage, news of Arthur's diagnosis had arrived, a rare degenerative neurological condition. The prognosis was uncertain, but the cost of the experimental treatments, the specialized nursing, and the constant consultations was astronomical. Liam had gone to see Arthur at the hospital. The older man, already looking diminished by the sterile white room, had tears in his eyes. I don't know how I'm going to manage this, Liam, he'd confessed, his voice trembling. My insurance will only cover a fraction of it. Clara, she's so wrapped up in her new life. Liam had sat by his bed, taking the older man's hand. He and Arthur had always shared a bond. Arthur had appreciated Liam's quiet nature, his love of craftsmanship, his integrity. He was more of a father to Liam than his own had ever been. Don't you worry about a thing, Arthur, Liam had said, his voice firm with resolve. I will handle it, all of it. You just focus on getting better. But you and Clara, Arthur started, his brow furrowed with concern. You don't owe me anything, not anymore. This isn't about Clara, Liam had said, and he meant it. This is about you. You've always been good to me. Let me be good to you. And so the arrangement began. Liam set up a direct, anonymous payment plan with the Ashton Clinic's administrative department. The bills were sent to a private post office box and paid from a bank account Clara knew nothing about. He had told her once, in the early days, I'm taking care of your father's medical expenses. She had looked at him, surprised, then a flicker of something unreadable crossed her face. Oh, well, Marcus and I were going to handle that. It's handled, Liam said simply. He had expected her to tell her father the truth. He had assumed, naively, that she would not take credit for an act of charity she had not performed. But as weeks turned into months, he began to hear things through the grapevine. Whispers of how wonderfully Clara and her new, wealthy partner were looking after her ailing father. At their first post-divorce encounter at one of Arthur's Sunday dinners, the lie was made manifest. Arthur had thanked Clara and Marcus profusely for their generosity. Clara had simply smiled and accepted the praise. Marcus had preened. Liam had said nothing. He had chosen silence to protect Arthur's peace. He had chosen to carry the secret, along with the cost. The first payment had been the hardest. Signing the check felt like signing away the last vestige of his life with Clara, a final, painful act of severance. But as he looked at the clinic's letterhead, he thought only of Arthur's kind, worried face. He sealed the envelope, a quiet promise to a man he still considered family. He had no idea then that this quiet act of decency would one day become the lever that would move the world. The city cafe was crowded, a midday hum of clattering ceramic and low chatter. Liam had chosen it for its anonymity, a place to decompress between a morning of site visits and an afternoon of intense design work. He was sketching in his leather journal, refining the sweeping curve of a glass atrium, when a shadow fell across his page. Well, look what we have here. The starving artist. Liam didn't need to look up. He recognized the voice, a blend of feigned bonhomie and genuine contempt. Marcus Thorne stood over his small table, with Clara a step behind him, a Hermes bag clutched in her hand like a shield. Liam slowly closed his journal and placed it beside his half-finished coffee. He looked up at Marcus, his expression neutral. "Marcus, Clara, still doodling in your little book, I see," Marcus said, gesturing at the journal with a flick of his wrist. "Still playing with your little building blocks while the real world moves on." He smiled, a predator's baring of teeth. "Clara and I were just doing some shopping. You know how it is. Sometimes you just have to treat yourself." He placed a hand on Clara's shoulder, his thumb stroking her collarbone. It was a gesture of ownership, crude and obvious. Clara offered a tight, uncomfortable smile. "Hello, Liam." Liam nodded at her, his gaze steady. He refused to be drawn into their drama. He had learned that the only way to win their game was not to play. "Let me get this for you," Marcus said suddenly, snatching the bill from Liam's table. He strode to the counter, pulling a thick roll of cash from his pocket and peeling off a large bill. "Keep the change," he told the barista loudly enough for half the cafe to hear. He walked back to the table, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. "Don't worry about it. Consider it a donation to the arts." The insult was so blatant, so designed to humiliate, that several people at nearby tables looked over, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Clara had the grace to look embarrassed, her eyes darting away from Liam's. She tugged on Marcus's arm. "Marcus, let's go." Liam remained seated, calm. The fire inside him burned a little hotter, but his voice, when he spoke, was even and low. "That isn't necessary, Marcus, but thank you for the offer." "Nonsense," Marcus boomed. "What's a few dollars between us?" He laughed and Clara pulled at him again, more insistently this time. "We have a reservation, Marcus. We need to leave." As they turned to walk away, Liam's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen. It was a call from Kenji Tanaka, the lead investor on the Northbridge Tower project. He ignored the call for a moment, watching Marcus and Clara leave. He saw the way Marcus placed a proprietary hand on the small of Clara's back, steering her through the crowd. He saw the slight slump in Clara's shoulders, a barely perceptible sign that the glittering life she had chosen was not without its own burdens. When they were gone, he answered the phone. "Mr. Tanaka, my apologies, I was just finishing up." The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and held a deep undercurrent of respect. "Liam-san, no apologies necessary. I just wanted to confirm our meeting for tomorrow. The board is flying in. They are exceptionally eager to see the final schematics for Phase 2. "They're ready, Kenji," Liam said, his gaze falling on the leather journal beside him. "I've made a few modifications to the Central Plaza design I think they'll appreciate. It improves pedestrian flow and adds a significant amount of green space without altering the structural footprint." "Excellent. Your work is transformative, Liam-san. The board considers you the cornerstone of this entire endeavor. The project's success rests on your vision." "I appreciate the confidence, Kenji," Liam said. I'll see you tomorrow at 10. He hung up the phone and sat for a moment in the sudden quiet. Cornerstone, vision, transformative. These were the words that defined his actual life. Not starving artist or doodler. Marcus, in his arrogant blindness, had tried to humiliate him over the price of a cup of coffee, unaware that Liam was in the process of finalizing a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars. A deal that would not only cement his reputation as one of the country's leading architects, but would also generate a personal windfall that would dwarf Marcus's entire net worth. Liam opened his journal again. He looked at the intricate lines of the building he was creating. It was strong, elegant, and built on an unshakable foundation of integrity and hard work. He thought of Marcus's world, a gaudy superstructure built on the inherited wealth of his father and the lies he told to prop up his own ego. It was a house of cards, and Liam knew that a house of cards could never withstand a storm. He took a sip of his now cold coffee. His patience wasn't weakness. It was a form of structural engineering. He was allowing the pressure to build, letting the antagonists expose their own shoddy construction, waiting for the perfect moment when a single, well-placed touch would bring the whole thing tumbling down. Clara stood in front of the full-length mirror in her walk-in closet, a cavernous room lined with designer clothes and expensive accessories. She adjusted the strap of a new silk dress, the fabric cool against her skin. In the reflection, she saw the life she had chosen. The opulence, the glamour, the sheer, unapologetic expense of it all. It was everything she had told herself she wanted. So why did a persistent, low-level hum of anxiety follow her everywhere she went? She told herself it was concern for her father. His illness was a constant, looming shadow. But if she were being honest, truly honest with herself in the unforgiving clarity of the mirror, she knew it was more than that. It was Liam. It was the memory of his quiet dignity in the face of Marcus's taunts. It was the unshakable calm in his eyes that she could no longer read. He had once been an open book to her, his emotions clear and accessible. Now he was a stranger, encased in a polite, impenetrable shell. Her relationship with Marcus was a whirlwind of activity, parties, travel, extravagant gifts. Marcus was attentive in his own way, a possessive, performative kind of attention. He loved showing her off, adorning her like a prized possession. And she had, for the most part, enjoyed it. It was intoxicating to be the center of such lavish focus. But there were moments, like now, in the quiet of her closet, when the shine wore off and she felt a disquieting emptiness. Marcus's cruelty towards Liam was a growing source of this discomfort. In the beginning, she had told herself it was just his competitive nature, the way powerful men behaved. She had even found it vaguely flattering that he saw Liam as enough of a rival to warrant such attention. But it had curdled into something ugly. The scene at the cafe had been mortifying. She had seen the pity in the eyes of the other patrons, and it was directed not at Liam, but at her. For a fleeting, terrifying moment, she had seen herself through their eyes. A woman who had traded a good man for a rich bully. She suppressed the thought, pushing it down with the practiced ease of one who avoids unpleasant truths. She had made her choice. This was her life now. She smoothed the silk of her dress. She was a partner to one of the city's most influential men. She had a beautiful home, an endless wardrobe, a future of guaranteed luxury. She repeated these facts to herself like a mantra, a charm against the creeping doubt. Meanwhile, at the Ashton Clinic, a different kind of observation was taking place. Eleanor Vance had been a nurse for 30 years, 20 of them as Arthur's primary caregiver since his initial, less severe diagnosis years ago. She was a woman of quiet efficiency and profound perception. She had seen families at their best and their worst, and she had a finely tuned instinct for authenticity. She watched as Clara and Marcus swept in for their weekly visits. They brought extravagant bouquets of flowers that were too large for the bedside table, and boxes of expensive chocolates that Arthur wasn't allowed to eat. They spoke loudly, their conversations revolving around their own lives, their own plans. They would pat Arthur's hand, ask the perfunctory questions. "How are you feeling, Dad? Are the nurses treating you well?" But they never seemed to truly listen to his answers. Their visits felt like performances, brief, bright, and ultimately hollow. Then there were Liam's visits. He came on different days, usually in the late afternoon. He never brought flashy gifts. He brought a newspaper and would read the sports section to Arthur. He brought a thermos of the specific herbal tea Arthur liked, brewed just the right way. He would sit for hours, sometimes in comfortable silence, other times talking quietly about books, or architecture, or old memories. He would help Arthur with his physical therapy exercises, his touch gentle but firm, his encouragement quiet and constant. Eleanor saw the difference. She saw how Arthur's entire demeanor changed when Liam was there. The tension in his shoulders would ease. A genuine smile would touch his lips. With Liam, Arthur was not just a patient, he was a person. Eleanor was also the one who saw the paperwork. Part of her job was coordinating with the administrative and billing departments to ensure her patients' care plans were up to date. A few months ago, out of simple curiosity, she had asked the head of billing, a friend of hers named Susan, about Arthur's account. "That Mr. Thorne is certainly a generous man," Eleanor had commented casually. "Paying for all this must be costing a fortune." Susan had looked up from her computer, a confused expression on her face. "Mr. Thorne? I don't have a Marcus Thorne on this account." "You must," Eleanor insisted. "His daughter's partner. He's always talking about taking care of everything." Susan had tapped a few keys, her brow furrowed. "No, the account is paid by a private trust. It's set up to be anonymous, but the legal name on the originating documents is Liam Holloway." The name hit Eleanor with the force of a physical blow. Liam, the quiet ex-husband, the man who sat for hours reading the newspaper to his former father-in-law. "Are you sure?" Eleanor whispered. "Positive," Susan said. "Paid on time, every single month. Like clockwork. Covers everything, no questions asked." Eleanor had left the billing office that day with a new, heavy understanding. The entire, elaborate performance by Clara and Marcus was a lie. A monstrous, self-serving lie. She watched them now with new eyes, their every word of concern, every gesture of affection, ringing false. She saw Liam's quiet visits in a new light, not as the lingering attachment of an ex-son-in-law, but as an act of profound, hidden integrity. She felt a slow boiling anger on his behalf, and on Arthur's. She was a professional. She did not get involved in family drama. But this felt different. This wasn't just drama. It was a deep and calculated deception being perpetrated against a sick, vulnerable man. And Eleanor Vance was not the kind of woman who could let that stand for long. She decided to wait, to watch, to gather her thoughts. But she knew, with the same certainty she felt when taking a patient's pulse, that the time for quiet observation was coming to an end. The invitation arrived via a sleek, black envelope delivered by courier. It was thick, expensive cardstock, the lettering embossed in gold. "Marcus Thorne and Clara Holloway cordially invite you to a celebration." Liam stared at it for a long moment before slitting it open. It was for a party at the Thorne family estate, a sprawling mansion in the most exclusive part of the city. The occasion was to celebrate the successful acquisition of a rival corporation, a deal that had been Marcus's obsession for the past 6 months. Liam's first instinct was to throw it away. The idea of spending an evening immersed in Marcus's world of smug triumph was nauseating. But a small, handwritten note tucked inside the formal invitation gave him pause. It was from Clara. "Liam, I know this is a lot to ask, but it would mean a lot to Dad if you were there. He's having a good week, and the doctors have cleared him to attend for a little while. Please come. For him. For him." It was the one phrase that could move him. The thought of Arthur, frail but present, surrounded by the noise and spectacle of Marcus's victory lap, made Liam's decision for him. Arthur would need a friendly face, an anchor of familiar calm in a sea of strangers. He would go for Arthur. The night of the party was a symphony of excess. Valets in crisp uniforms lined the long, sweeping driveway. Music drifted from the open doors of the mansion, a massive stone edifice that looked more like a museum than a home. Inside, hundreds of guests milled about, a glittering assembly of the city's elite. Champagne flowed from fountains, and tables groaned under the weight of extravagant food. Liam found Arthur in a quiet alcove off the main ballroom, seated in a comfortable armchair. Eleanor, bless her heart, was with him, a calm and steady presence in her simple nurse's uniform. She had insisted on accompanying him, a decision for which Liam was profoundly grateful. "Liam, you came!" Arthur's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "I wouldn't miss it, Arthur," Liam said, shaking his hand. He nodded to Eleanor. "Thank you for being here with him. Someone has to make sure he doesn't have more than one glass of champagne," she said with a wry smile, but her eyes conveyed a deeper message of solidarity. They were soon interrupted by the arrival of the hosts. Marcus, resplendent in a tailored tuxedo, was in his element. Clara was on his arm, draped in a glittering silver gown, a perfect accessory to his success. "Liam, glad you could make it," Marcus said, his tone magnanimous. "Good of you to come out and see how the other half lives." He winked, as if sharing a private joke. Before Liam could respond, Marcus clapped his hands together, drawing the attention of the nearby guests. "Friends, colleagues, if I could have your attention for just a moment." A hush fell over the crowd. Marcus stepped onto a small, impromptu stage, a microphone appearing in his hand as if by magic. He beamed, soaking in the attention. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate with me, with us," he began, gesturing to Clara. "Tonight is about success. It's about vision, but it's also about family. And in that spirit, I have a special announcement to make." He paused for dramatic effect. Liam felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. "As many of you know, my lovely Clara's father, Arthur, is a fighter. He's battling a tough illness, and his care, as you can imagine, is extensive." He looked over at Arthur, a look of practiced compassion on his face. "Clara and I have been honored to handle his needs, but I've decided it's time to formalize that commitment. Tonight, I am pleased to announce the formation of the Thorn Foundation for Neurological Health. Its first and primary mission will be to oversee and fund Arthur's complete and total care for the rest of his life." A ripple of applause went through the crowd. People murmured their approval. "How generous," someone whispered. "What a good man." Marcus held up a hand, silencing them. "But it's not just about money. It's about legacy. It's about community." His eyes found Liam in the crowd. A cruel, triumphant smile played on his lips. "And in the spirit of community, I want to extend an olive branch. Liam, as a sign of goodwill and in recognition of your past relationship with the family, I would like to offer you a token position on the Foundation's board. An honorary seat, of course. No real duties, just a way for you to feel involved." The public nature of the offer, the condescending tone, the deliberate use of the words token and honorary, it was a masterclass in humiliation. It was designed to cast Liam as a pathetic charity case, a ghost from the past being indulged by the new lord of the manor. The guests all turned to look at him, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Clara stared at the floor, her knuckles white as she gripped her champagne flute. This was it, the final, unbearable weight, the breaking point. Liam felt the floor drop out from under him, the controlled calm he had maintained for so long finally beginning to fracture. He opened his mouth to speak, though he had no idea what he would say. But he never got the chance. From the back of the alcove, a new voice spoke, quiet, but carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. "That won't be necessary." All heads turned. Arthur was pushing himself up from his armchair, his body frail but his spine ramrod straight. Eleanor stood beside him, a steadying hand on his elbow. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his eyes burning with a cold fire fixed on Marcus. The music seemed to fade away. The entire glittering party held its breath. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute, a sudden, shocking void where moments before there had been music and laughter. Every eye was fixed on the frail, elderly man who had just spoken with such unexpected force. Arthur took another slow step forward, leaning slightly on Eleanor's arm, but propelled by a will of his own. His gaze was locked on Marcus, who still stood on the small stage, the microphone held loosely in his hand, his triumphant smile frozen and beginning to curdle. "What did you say, Arthur?" Marcus asked, attempting a light, dismissive tone that failed utterly. The jovial host was gone, replaced by a man suddenly on the defensive. "I said," Arthur repeated, his voice clearer and stronger now, resonating in the stillness, "that your foundation, your grand, generous offer, it won't be necessary." A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Clara took a step toward her father, her face a mask of panic. "Dad, what are you doing? You should be sitting down." Arthur ignored her. His eyes, blazing with a righteous fury that seemed to give him a strength his body no longer possessed, did not leave Marcus. "You stand up there on your stage, in your palace, and you talk about your generosity, your commitment, your honor." Each word was a small, sharp stone thrown at the edifice of Marcus's ego. "You speak of funding my care as if it's a future promise, a grand gesture you are about to make." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Liam stood motionless, a spectator at the demolition he had long anticipated but never orchestrated. He felt a strange sense of calm descend. The storm had broken, and it was not his to control. "Let me ask you a question, Marcus," Arthur continued, his voice dropping to a conversational, almost surgical level. "In front of all your important friends and partners, in the year since I was diagnosed, how much, exactly, have you paid for my care? Can you give me a number?" Marcus's face went pale. The confident bluster evaporated, leaving behind a raw, cornered panic. "Arthur, this is hardly the time or the place." "I think it's the perfect time and place," Arthur countered, his voice like steel. "You made it the time and place when you used my illness as a prop for your own vanity. So tell me, how much? 100,000? 50? Have you ever paid a single bill? Have you ever made a single phone call to the clinic's billing department?" Marcus was speechless. He looked to Clara for help, but she was ashen-faced, staring at her father as if he were a ghost. She shook her head slightly, a tiny, desperate gesture. The silence stretched, becoming unbearable. Marcus's business partners were watching him, their expressions shifting from admiration to suspicion. The foundation of his credibility was cracking in real time. Arthur let the silence do its work for a long, brutal moment before he finally broke it. He turned his head slowly, his gaze sweeping past the stunned guests until it found Liam, who was standing quietly by the wall. His expression softened. The fire in his eyes was replaced by a look of profound, heart-wrenching gratitude. "For the past 12 months, Arthur announced, his voice ringing with conviction, every single bill, every treatment, every nurse, every consultation has been paid for. Paid in full, on time, without a single word of complaint or demand for recognition." He took a slow breath, his eyes still locked on Liam's. "But it wasn't paid by Marcus Thorne. It wasn't paid by my daughter." He turned back to the crowd, his voice rising, a final, devastating crescendo of truth. "It was paid by this man, Liam Holloway, my former son-in-law, the man your host just tried to publicly humiliate." The quiet bomb had detonated. The shockwave was silent but catastrophic. A collective gasp went through the room. People turned to stare at Liam, then back at Marcus and Clara, their faces a canvas of dawning comprehension and utter disbelief. The narrative of the evening, of Marcus's triumph and generosity, had been violently, irrevocably rewritten. Arthur's gaze returned to his daughter. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep, sorrowful disappointment that was somehow far more damning. "You let him do this, Clara. You stood there and you let this lie grow. You took the credit. You accepted my thanks, knowing you had done nothing to earn it. How could you?" Clara finally broke. A sob escaped her lips, a raw, ugly sound in the pristine silence. "Dad, I didn't. We were going to—" Her words dissolved into incoherent stammers. Arthur simply shook his head, a gesture of finality. He then turned his back on his daughter and on Marcus. He looked at Liam, and in that look was a world of apology, of gratitude, and of shared integrity. "Liam," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "my boy, thank you." Then, with a dignity that eclipsed all the wealth in the room, he turned to Eleanor. "I think I've had enough excitement for one evening. Please, take me home." As Eleanor gently guided Arthur through the stunned, parting crowd, a new sound began to fill the silence. It was the sound of people talking in hushed, urgent tones, the sound of judgment, the sound of a reputation being dismantled, piece by piece. Marcus stood on his stage, no longer a king in his castle, but a fraud exposed in the glare of 100 pairs of eyes. The party was over. The aftermath was a slow, agonizing spectacle. As Arthur and Eleanor departed, a vacuum of authority was left in their wake, and into that void rushed whispers, then murmurs, then open conversation. The spell of the evening was broken. The guests, who moments before had been sipping champagne and laughing at Marcus's jokes, now looked at him with a mixture of contempt and morbid fascination. They began to cluster in small groups, their backs turned to the stage, their voices low and sharp. Liam watched it all unfold with a sense of profound detachment. He felt no triumph, no glee, only a deep, resonant sadness for Arthur, and a strange, hollow pity for Clara. He had wanted justice, but seeing it delivered so brutally was not satisfying. It was simply devastating. Marcus finally seemed to reboot. He stumbled off the small stage, his face a blotchy red. He strode over to Liam, his fists clenched. For a moment, Liam thought Marcus might resort to physical violence, a last, desperate act of a man who had lost control of the narrative. "You," Marcus hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "You planned this. You set me up." Liam met his gaze without flinching. His calm was absolute, a rock against which Marcus's fury broke. "I did nothing, Marcus. I said nothing. Your own arrogance set you up. You built a house on a foundation of lies, and it collapsed." That's an architectural principle even you should be able to understand. The architectural metaphor, so precise and fitting, seemed to enrage Marcus further. He lunged forward, but a hand caught his arm. It was one of his senior business partners, a stern-looking man named Mr. Harrison. "That's enough, Thorne," Harrison said, his voice cold as ice. "You've made a big enough fool of yourself for one night." He looked from Marcus's contorted face to Liam's calm one. He then looked at the guests, who were now starting to make their excuses and head for the door. The celebration had become a wake. Harrison's eyes narrowed. "The deal we celebrated tonight was built on trust, on an image of strength and integrity. I'm beginning to question the validity of that image." He released Marcus's arm with a look of undisguised disgust. "We'll be in touch on Monday to reevaluate." He turned and walked away, his departure signaling a far greater loss for Marcus than mere social standing. Clara, who had been standing frozen, a statue of shame, finally moved. She rushed towards where her father had been, as if hoping he might still be there. Then she turned, her eyes wild with panic, and saw Liam. She started towards him, her hands outstretched, a plea forming on her lips. "Liam, I'm so sorry. I never meant—" Liam simply held up a hand, a gesture not of anger, but of finality. Not now, Clara. There was nothing more to be said. The truth had done its work. The quiet dignity he had maintained for a year had proven to be more powerful than all of Marcus's noise. The reversal was complete. Those who had sought to humiliate were now the ones drowning in shame. Those who had postured with false power were now utterly powerless. People began to leave in droves. The valets who had been rushing to park cars were now rushing to retrieve them for the fleeing guests. The sound of expensive engines firing up and speeding down the long driveway was the sound of rats deserting a sinking ship. Within 30 minutes, the grand ballroom was nearly empty. The champagne fountains still bubbled. The extravagant food lay untouched, a grotesque monument to a party that had died. Marcus stood alone in the center of the room, his tuxedo looking like a costume, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Clara had collapsed onto a damask sofa, her face buried in her hands, her sobs the only sound in the cavernous space. Liam walked through the wreckage of their evening, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. He didn't look at them as he passed. He had seen enough. He stepped out into the cool night air, leaving the palace of lies to its disgraced king and queen. He took a deep breath, the air clean and fresh in his lungs. It was the first breath of a new kind of freedom. The burden of the secret was lifted, but the weight of the consequences, he knew, was just beginning to settle. The days that followed were a cascade of consequences. The story of Marcus Thorne's disastrous party spread through the city's elite circles like a contagion. It was the kind of story they loved, a tale of hubris and downfall, rich with moral failure. The business journals, usually so fawning over Marcus, began to publish speculative pieces, using coded language like questions of character and a crisis of confidence among investors. As Mr. Harrison had promised, the reevaluation of Marcus's acquisition deal was swift and brutal. The consortium of partners, citing a fundamental loss of trust in his leadership and character, pulled their backing. The deal, which was to have been the crowning achievement of Marcus's career, collapsed in a spectacular fashion, taking a significant chunk of his personal fortune with it in penalties and lost capital. The unassailable man had proven to be remarkably fragile. His social life disintegrated as well. Invitations dried up. Phone calls went unreturned. He and Clara found themselves isolated, pariahs in the very world they had prized above all else. Their wealth, which had been a passport to any society, was now just money, unable to buy back the one thing they had so carelessly squandered: respect. A week after the party, Clara appeared at Liam's studio. He saw her through the glass door, hesitating on the sidewalk, looking small and uncertain. He felt a pang of something, not love, but a ghost of an old tenderness. He buzzed her in. She stood in the middle of his bright, airy workspace, looking around as if seeing it for the first time. It was a world away from the opulent, heavy interiors she now inhabited. "It's beautiful here," she whispered. "What do you want, Clara?" Liam asked, his voice gentle but firm. He remained behind his large drafting table, the space a comfortable barrier between them. Tears immediately welled in her eyes. "I came to apologize, Liam. What I did, what I let happen, it was unforgivable. I know that." She took a hesitant step forward. "I was a fool. I was blinded by all of it. The money, the excitement. I thought it was what I wanted. I thought it was what would make me happy." "And are you happy, Clara?" he asked, the question simple, direct. Her face crumpled. "I'm miserable. Marcus he's not the man I thought he was. He's angry all the time. He blames me. He blames you. He blames my father. The money doesn't matter when you're living in a prison." She looked at him, her eyes pleading. "I miss you, Liam. I miss this. I miss us." This was the moment. The moment he could have taken his revenge. He could have been cruel, thrown her hypocrisy back in her face. But looking at her, He felt only a profound sense of finality. The us she was talking about was long dead, and she was the one who had buried it. He walked around the table and stood before her. He did not raise his voice. He did not list his resentments with anger. He simply began to speak, his voice calm and measured, a technique he now recognized as the moral mirror. Do you remember that dinner about 6 months ago at your father's house? When Marcus joked that my car was a historical artifact and you laughed? I remember. Do you remember when he generously paid for my coffee and called me a charity case? I remember the look on your face. It wasn't protest. It was just embarrassment. You weren't ashamed of his cruelty. You were ashamed to be associated with my supposed failure. He cataloged each incident, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. The quiet insults, the public humiliations, her consistent, enabling silence. He spoke of the nights he had stayed up, worrying about Arthur's health, while also processing the fresh sting of their condescension. I'm not telling you this to hurt you, Clara, he concluded, his voice softening with a sad sincerity. I'm telling you this so you understand. You didn't just leave me. You actively participated in trying to diminish me. You tried to break my spirit. And for what? For a lifestyle that has now turned to ash in your hands. He paused, letting her absorb the full weight of his words. The person you were with me, or the person I thought you were, would never have done that. I don't know who you are anymore, and I can't forgive someone I don't know. I think you should go. She stared at him, the last glimmer of hope dying in her eyes. She saw the truth in his words, the unbridgeable chasm her own choices had created between them. She didn't argue. She simply turned and walked out of his life, this time for good. The following day, Liam met with Arthur and a highly respected estate lawyer. In the quiet, wood-paneled office, they put the finishing touches on a new plan. Liam was establishing the Arthur Vance Trust, an irrevocable fund dedicated solely to his former father-in-law's health and well-being. He endowed it with a sum so significant that it would guarantee Arthur the best possible care in any facility in the world for the rest of his natural life, with plenty left over for comfort and enjoyment. The trust would be managed by a neutral third-party bank, with Eleanor Vance appointed as the official patient advocate, giving her the authority to make decisions in Arthur's best interest. When the documents were signed, Arthur turned to Liam, his eyes wet with tears. "This is too much, son. After everything." Liam placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's exactly the right amount, Arthur. This has nothing to do with Clara or Marcus. This is for you. Now your care is secure. It is untouchable. It depends on no one's mood or generosity. It is simply a fact." In that moment, Liam understood the true nature of power. It wasn't about humiliating others or flaunting wealth. It was about the ability to create security, to build something strong and permanent that could protect the people you cared about. It was the quiet, unshakable strength of a well-built foundation. Months later, the dust had settled, leaving behind a landscape irrevocably altered. Liam stood on a windswept observation deck on the 50th floor of the nearly completed Northbridge Tower. The city sprawled out beneath him, a breathtaking tapestry of light and shadow. His building, his vision, was now a reality, a graceful, soaring structure of glass and steel that seemed to touch the sky. It was already being hailed as a masterpiece, a new icon for the city. His firm was inundated with offers from around the world. His secret success was no longer a secret, but a celebrated fact. He found he didn't care much for the fame. What he cared about was the work itself, the act of creation. He found peace in the clean lines of his designs, in the logic of engineering, in the quiet satisfaction of building something of lasting value. He still visited Arthur regularly. With the financial stress gone and his daughter's toxic influence removed, Arthur's health had surprisingly stabilized. There was no cure for his condition, but his spirit was lighter, his days more peaceful. They would sit in the garden of Arthur's small, comfortable new assisted living apartment, paid for by the trust, and talk for hours, two old friends enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company. He heard about Clara and Marcus occasionally, through the faint whispers of gossip that still reached him. Theirs was a cautionary tale. They were still together, trapped in their gilded cage by shared shame and financial entanglement. Marcus had managed to salvage a fraction of his business empire, but his reputation was permanently tarnished. He was a ghost in the world he once commanded. Clara lived in his shadow, her beauty seeming to fade under the weight of her choices. They were a portrait of misery, a testament to the fact that a life built on arrogance and deceit is no life at all. Liam felt no pleasure in their fate. He had maintained his moral high ground, refusing to stoop to their level. His victory was not in their downfall, but in his own quiet, steady rise. He had not sought revenge. He had simply allowed the truth to do its work. And the truth, he had learned, was the most powerful force of all. It was the ultimate structural support. Anything built without it was destined to collapse. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city, Liam looked out at the horizon. He thought about the nature of worth. He had been judged by his quiet demeanor, his modest car, his lack of ostentation. But his true worth was not in what he owned, but in what he could build. It was in his integrity, his loyalty, and his patience. It was in the silent promise he had kept to a good man. The world is full of people who mistake noise for strength and performance for substance. But true strength is quiet. It's the foundation that holds everything up, unseen and uncelebrated, until the day the storm comes. And when it does, it's the only thing that remains standing. What do you think? Is this kind of quiet justice the most satisfying? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you found value in this story, please give it a like and subscribe for more tales of integrity, resilience, and the ultimate triumph of character. Until next time, remember that your true worth is built, not bought.